am Philip Blackman with the Engineers and Architects of Hawaii. We are happy to feature in this month's program nationally known fire protection consultant and fire photographer Paul Fox. Paul talks about the precedent-setting 1985 Naval aviation fuel tank fire near Pearl City. This fire was discovered to have been started by an unanticipated static electricity discharge after the application of AFFF foam by the fire department. Paul explains how, through their initial failures, they determined the importance of first establishing continuous and adequate supplies of water and foam before starting to fight a tank fire. Please email your insights or questions to eahawaii@gmail.com. Mahalo.
This was one of the most significant fires in tank firefighting history. This was because of how it was started and the fact that it was so well documented. This fire ignited due to the application of an AFFF blanket by the fire department. To start with, it must be stated that in no way was this the fire department's fault. At the time of this incident, the knowledge about how this could occur was unknown. It is because of the extensive research done by the British Petroleum Research Division and others, and through extensive study of this documentation, that this new knowledge was learned. To start with, a little bit of basic storage tank knowledge. There are three basic types of storage tanks: cone roof tanks, internal floating roof tanks, and, like this involved tank, the open top floating roof or lid tanks. The open top floating lid roof is basically a cone roof tank, but instead of having a fixed roof, the roof floats up and down on top of the surface of the product. This eliminates most of the vapor-air mixture, which is the source of the fire. The only vapor-air mixture that is allowed is around the circumference of the tank, where it slides up and down the tank. If properly handled, these are not a very difficult fire to handle. Normally, with taking a hand line up the stairwell, it can be fought from the platform. Then walk around the wind girder to extinguish the fire. Extreme care must be taken when working from the wind girder. Trying to drag your hose around this narrow walkway is not the easiest job. Be sure you have enough manpower to handle the operation, and if you should ever lose control of the hose, let it go. Don't try to fight it. Don't allow the hose to take you over the side with it in case something should go wrong. You can always pull the hose back up. It's a lot more difficult to deal with a man who's gone down over the side. If external streams are used, such as from an aerial device, it is important that the roof drain is open so that any excess foam flows down the drain and out of the tank and is not allowed to accumulate on and thusly weigh down the floating roof. If enough foam is accumulated on the roof or one of the pontoons is damaged, this could allow the roof to sink. If your roof sinks, you will end up with a full surface fire, which is a lot more difficult to handle. We all have seen news footage of tank fires over the years. You've seen the bellowing balls of fire coming out of the top of these tanks. Exactly what's going on here? First, we have to go back to good old basic fire science 101. Remember the fire triangle? Air, heat, and fuel. All are needed for fire to exist. With each one of these bowls of fire coming out of the top of the tank, it's like a breath for the fire. It is the fire sucking in air, and then because of the immensity of the fire, using up that air until it can take another breath, hence another combustion, i.e. ball of fire. If you end up with a full surface fire, is that really a full surface fire? You have fire around, wall to wall, totally involving the tank at the top of the tank, but not really. There's actually not enough air in the middle of this fire to support combustion. Around the circumference of the tank is immense fire, immense enough that it is using up the incoming air and not allowing enough air to reach the center of the tank to cause a combustion there. This is called the Allen Fox theory of storage tank fires. If you could look straight down into the tank and cut off the top of the fire and smoke, then you would see fire burning around the circumference for about 3 or 4 feet deep. The center of the tank just being black. It is hot, but not as hot as around the circumference, but hot enough to support combustion if there was enough air there. But there isn't. This is why in over-the-top firefighting with large caliber portable foam monitors, you aim for the center of the tank. This is the first place where the foam will take a bite on the fire, and it will spread out from there, and slowly spreading out to where it impacts the fire burning around the circumference. And once this enormous flame front is knocked down, you just have this small wall of fire burning around the circumference until you can cool the hot metal sides down enough that the foam seals up against it and you get total extinguishment. The Pearl City Peninsula Naval Fuel Depot tank fire. This is early in the firefighting, and fire companies have set up and begun their initial operations. So let's back up for a minute and let you know what we are dealing with. This was a 120-foot diameter tank of avgas, also known as JP4. The tank had a total capacity of 80,000 barrels when full, but at the time of the fire only had 48,000 barrels of avgas, JP4, in it. So when full, this tank held over 3 million gallons of JP4. Early on the morning of October 20th, 1985, a strong rainstorm came through and started to flood the roof of this storage tank. At approximately 6:20 a.m. on the 20th, rain had accumulated enough on the top of this floating roof that it began to sink. Was the roof drain open? I don't know. In some cases, tank farms normally leave this drain open, but in other tank farms, they keep it closed and only open it manually when they suspect water on the roof. The roof eventually sank to the bottom of the tank at about 6:25 a.m. on the 20th. Black dots here indicate the tanks. The larger dot towards the bottom was the involved tank. The smaller dot represents the 4 other tanks of varying sizes. After the roof sank, the Navy attempted to pump the product out, but they had a little problem. Nowhere to put it. military had been in the process of transferring over from JP4 to use of JP5, a less flammable version of aviation fuel. And they had no tankage available to pump this JP4 into at the start of the fire. They had only pumped out 6,000 barrels by the time the fire started. Meanwhile, the residential neighborhood downwind from this tank was complaining about the fumes. This was one of our more high-end military residential areas with high-ranking Navy officials living there. So when they complained, they were heard. So the Federal Fire Department was called in to apply an AFFF blanket to the top of the tank and maintain that blanket until the tank could be drained and then repairs started. So we had a tank of JP4 with its roof at the bottom and an AFFF blanket across the top of it. But you have to remember, AFFF is nothing more than basically water designed to float on top of a hydrocarbon fuel. Any amount of excess water within this foam blanket just falls out and falls to the bottom of the tank. This is the nature of AFFF. At the time of the fire, it was not considered to be a problem. AFFF produces a thin but very effective barrier to prevent ignition. But this barrier doesn't last forever. It being a typical hot Hawaiian day, this blanket quickly dried up and broke up. So every couple of hours or so, the fire department would come back and reapply an AFFF blanket to get full surface coverage once again. But then the foam blanket would break down again, and you would have open spots of exposed product. The fire department was getting its foam for this operation from the foam house on the property that supplied a ring main system running around the entire tank farm on top of the dike. The fire department had taken 1 2.5 and 2 3-inch lines off this ring main system, ran them up the stairs on the side of the tank, and tied them off to the platform at the top. This is how they were applying the AFFF. Now, this going to be a long-term operation, and the fire company was still in service. They didn't want to tie up their regular fog nozzles for this operation. But the only spare nozzles that they had at the time were old NAP or Naval all-purpose nozzles. Heavy brass nozzles that have had a fixed spray pattern and a straight stream setting. So 3 of the nozzles were being used at the start of the fire. On the morning of October 23rd, the fire department returned to apply the AFFF blanket. At this point, once again, only about 50% or less of the foam blanket remained on the surface. When they opened up the first nozzle, it was on a straight stream setting. The stream shot out to about the center of the tank, and as it hit the surface, according to the firefighters that were on the platform at the time, there was a blue flash and the entire tank ignited. The time, shortly before 11:51, which was the actual time of the alarm after firefighters made a hasty retreat down the stairs. This was actually 3 days after the roof had sunk and after 2 days of applying AFFF. So, what happened? Well, that water draining out of the AFFF blanket, falling to the bottom of the tank, had built up an enormous static electricity charge. When the stream hit the surface, it supplied the path to produce a static electricity discharge, a discharge hot enough to ignite the flammable vapors. Once again, it should be noted that at the time of this incident, This was unknown. Only after extensive research and testing and the studying of other similar tank fires around the world was this phenomenon discovered. One of the things that worked extremely well is what you see on the far right here. Very early in the fire, the person in charge of this tank farm was paired with a district chief of the federal fire department. The two of them became inseparable throughout the fire. So technical information about anything and everything that you would want to know about the tank farm was always available, just a radio call away. Now, the first P2 crash truck arrives from Hickam Air Force Base Fire Department. He arrived and, like he was trained in typical aircraft firefighting, immediately attacked the fire. In tank farm firefighting, speed is not the essential factor. Barring any immediate rescues that might be necessary, the P2 had not established a continuous water or foam supply for it to maintain the attack. It is important that you do the math before starting your attack so you know how much you're going to need for how long, and have that all ready to go before you start your attack. The first part of this plan is knowing the size of your fire. This is calculating your square footage involved. This is the formula pi r squared. Pi times the radius of the tank squared. But how many of us remember pi, which is actually 3.14? The simpler formula is diameter squared times 0.785. In this case, a 120-foot diameter tank squared equals 14,400. Times that by 0.785 gives you the square footage of the tank, 11,304 feet. You are not done yet. You have to times your square footage by your application rate, which according to NFPA pamphlet 11 is 0.16 gallons per square foot per minute. So you do the math and you see that you will need 1,808 gallons per minute to extinguish this tank. Remember, this is a minimum. Anything above this will just add insurance to your attack. So since the P2 did not have a continuous water supply to it, it ran out of water and has shut down. But those three tied off hose lines running up the side of the tank were still applying AFFF, and what the P2 was applying was just enough to approach control of the fire. It was almost out. From Air 1, the Honolulu Fire Department helicopter, the chief of HFD could see that those three hose lines running up the side of the tank, still applying foam, were at this point just disturbing the foam blanket, causing the fire to continue in that area. The P2 application, plus what these three hose lines were doing, had almost control of all of the fire, except where these lines were allowing the fire to continue to burn. The chief ordered these lines to be shut down, but since there wasn't a common radio frequency, that command took a while to get to the appropriate people to shut down those hose lines. The P2 has run out of foam concentrate and withdrawn, and you can see the arrival of the P-15 crash truck from Hickam. The P2 has withdrawn from the primary attack position, and the P-15 is now moving into that position. Unfortunately, the P-15, as soon as it got into position, once again, like the P2, started its attack. Even though Hickam firefighters have been trained in storage tank firefighting since the Chevron tank farm fire in 1980, these aircraft firefighters default to their primary mission, and that overtook the training to the point where they would attack any fire as quickly as they could. That was their basic training. At this point, the P-15 did not have a continuous water and foam supply laid to them. But with the foam previously applied by the P2 and the foam from those flapping 3 hose lines at the top of the stairs, you got Knockdown. Over at the command post, there was an enormous sigh of relief. But at this point, the P-15 runs out of water. Remember, it had not had a continuous water or foam supply laid to him yet. Within 5 minutes, a puff of smoke comes back. Within 7 minutes, the fire is well on its way back, and there is no foam attack capability set up at this point. 10 minutes later, and the tank is back to full involvement. Start all over. So to review, we had almost Knockdown and then lost it because a continuous water and supply line was not established. Then we got Knockdown 99%, but because continuous water and foam supply lines were still not laid, we lost it a second time. Now, water and supply lines are finally laid to the P-15. The tanker from Hickam, now filled with 5,000 gallons of AFFF concentrate, has been brought into position, and a continuous foam supply has been established to the P-15. The P-15 foam tank has been filled, and the tanker is being refilled. The P-15 turret operator was told to keep his frickin' hands off the turret. Do not do anything until we tell you to. A continuous foam resupply has been established with the help of Marines from a warehouse across the street. These Marines did an excellent job keeping the tanker full by resupplying it with 5-gallon pails as quickly as they could dump them. Now, about this ladder pipe operation that you see here on the left. First, I have to back you up a bit. At the time of this fire, military crash trucks did not have 2.5-inch outlets of proportionate foam. The only way to get foam out of these trucks was via the turret or a small 1-inch booster line. Why these trucks were built this way, I'll never figure out. Because of this, Chief John Lees, the Deputy Chief of Hickam Air Force Base, and I should add my mentor, and I developed what I call pseudo-proportioning. This was a process where we took a pre-designed disc with a hole in the middle of it, placing it in a coupling, feeding the pumper that was applying a 1,000 GPM stream. At the right pressure, pure concentrate was pumped through this disc into the pumper, and that was then applying the 1,000 GPM stream. This would have worked. The plan was that this was going to be the primary attack backed up by the P-15 crash truck. Unfortunately, as Chief Lees and I were setting up the hose line, inserting the disc, and figuring out what intake on the pumper to use, somebody decided to change out the nozzle on the ladder pipe from a standard master stream fog nozzle to an air aspirating foam nozzle. Where that foam nozzle came from, I'll never know that either. Nevertheless, when we went into operation, and looked up, we saw this change, and now the reach of the stream was cut down by at least a third of the distance, and now could no longer reach the tank burning. We continued with the P-15 attack. Then someone thought, hey, wait a minute, we should double check our math. We needed 1,808 gallons per minute to put this tank out. But the P-15 alone was only putting out 1,200 gallons per minute. We were short, but we had started the attack and had a continuous water and foam supply, so we decided to just continue on. The P2, now having been fully resurfaced with foam and water, was quickly brought back into play. There was a chain link fence that was in the way. It just had to go. With the P2 giving that little extra kick, suddenly, like almost turning off a light bulb. Remember the Alan Fox theory on what is happening? The fire was controlled, and within a few minutes after that, the foam was sealing up against the hot metal sides, and the fire was extinguished. The only cooling stream applied to the tank was 180 degrees opposite the foam entry point, where it took its first visible bite. It still wasn't over. Not quite yet. We had to be sure that we had enough foam concentrate to continue to resupply the blanket until the tank could be finally drained. And always remember, training isn't just everything. Training is life. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact me or to go to our website, www.hydrocarbonfirefighting.com, for additional videos and articles.
Engineers and architects of Hawaii welcome your comments on this program and any of our recent programs. We encourage your direct participation in this community outreach, so please email us your comments and ideas at eahawaii@gmail.com.